First class on Transglobal Airlines Flight 2187 was a sanctuary of privilege. Hand-stitched leather seats, premium champagne, attentive service. It was a world Bradley Wilson had grown accustomed to as the airline's chief flight services officer, responsible for passenger experience across the entire fleet. Today, Bradley moved through the cabin with practiced authority, overseeing the pre-flight service on this Atlanta to San Francisco route. A last-minute inspection before takeoff was his trademark, the personal touch that had earned him rapid promotion through the company ranks. "Everything looks excellent," he murmured to Jessica Winters, the lead flight attendant. "The crew properly chilled?" "Of course, sir," Jessica nodded, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled beneath her uniform cap. "First class is at full capacity today. 14 passengers all checked in." Bradley nodded approvingly, glancing at his watch. Boarding would begin in 20 minutes, just enough time for a final briefing with the crew. As they moved toward the galley, the sound of voices at the aircraft door caught their attention. A flight attendant was speaking with someone just outside Bradley's line of sight, her tone increasingly strained. "I understand, ma'am, but you'll need to wait until your boarding group is called." "I'm not trying to board early," came the reply, a woman's voice with a subtle accent. "I just need to request a seat change. My confirmation shows—" "Ma'am, please step back from the gate. You'll need to speak with the gate agent when boarding begins." Bradley moved toward the exchange, Jessica following closely behind. At the doorway stood a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a simple but elegant charcoal pantsuit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her brown skin warm against the white collar of her blouse. She held a first-class boarding pass in one hand and a small leather portfolio in the other. "Is there a problem here, Amber?" Bradley asked. The flight attendant. Amber turned, relief crossing her features. "This passenger is trying to pre-board, Mr. Wilson. I've asked her to wait with the other coach passengers." The woman's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not trying to board early," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm not in coach. I have a first-class ticket." She extended her boarding pass. "There seems to be a mistake with my seat assignment. I specifically requested a window, but I've been assigned an aisle." Bradley barely glanced at the boarding pass, his gaze moving from the woman's face to her simple carry-on luggage. Nice quality, but not the designer brands his first-class passengers typically carried. "I see," he said, his tone cooling slightly. "And you are?" "Dr. Elena Fuentes," she replied. "I've been a Transglobal Platinum member for 3 years now." Jessica stepped forward, taking the boarding pass from Elena's hand. She examined it with obvious skepticism. "This does appear to be a first-class ticket," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "But seat changes need to be handled by the gate agent, not the flight crew. You'll need to wait." Elena took a slow, measured breath. "I understand. I just wanted to inquire before boarding since I need a window seat to work during the flight. I have a presentation to prepare." Bradley's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced down to see an alert from the system. A VIP passenger had just checked in. Winston Hargrove, CEO of Pinnacle Investments, a major client of the airline. He would be expecting his usual premium service. "As Ms. Winters said, you'll need to speak with the gate agent," Bradley said dismissively. "If you'll excuse us, we're preparing for boarding." Eleanor nodded once, her expression unreadable as she stepped away from the door. Bradley watched her go, then turned to Jessica. "Make sure Mr. Hargrove gets the Dom Perignon when he boards." "Not the Krug we're serving everyone else." "Of course," Jessica replied. "And that woman's seat?" Bradley waved a hand. "If there's a window available in first, fine. If not, she'll have to manage. I doubt she'll be a regular in our premium cabin anyway." 90 minutes later, Flight 2187 was cruising at 37,000 feet. Bradley moved through the first-class cabin, personally checking on his VIP passengers. Winston Hargrove had been properly attended to and was now dozing with an eye mask, a half-empty glass of Dom Perignon on his tray table. Bradley paused when he reached row 3. Elena Fuentes sat in seat, an aisle seat, her small workspace meticulously organized. A tablet displayed complex data charts, while her notebook contained handwritten equations and diagrams. She worked with focused intensity, seemingly unaware of his presence. "Finding everything satisfactory?" Bradley asked, more out of procedure. than genuine concern. Elena looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Yes, thank you, though I would have preferred the window seat I originally booked. Unfortunately, all window seats in first class were assigned," he replied smoothly. It wasn't entirely true. There had been one available, but he'd given it to a last-minute business upgrade instead. "Perhaps on your next flight." Elena returned to her work without comment. As Bradley continued his rounds, he couldn't help but notice how differently Elena was treated compared to the other first-class passengers. When Jessica offered champagne, her offer to Elena seemed perfunctory, almost reluctant. When Amber distributed hot towels, she practically dropped Elena's in her lap while carefully handing them to others. These were subtle differences, a slightly delayed response, a forced smile, service without the warmth extended to others. Nothing obvious enough to call out, but noticeable to anyone paying attention. Bradley observed this with mild discomfort, but said nothing. After all, the woman had been accommodated in first class, despite not looking the part. 2 hours into the flight. Bradley was checking inventory in the galley when a commotion erupted in the first-class cabin. He emerged to find Jessica standing over Elena, her face flushed with barely controlled anger. "Is there a problem?" Bradley asked, immediately moving toward them. "This passenger is making unreasonable demands," Jessica said tightly. Elena remained, seated, her expression calm despite the tension. "I asked for a glass of water 20 minutes ago. When it didn't come, I pressed the call button. Twice. No one responded." Jessica's lips thinned. "We've been busy with meal service preparation, and this passenger keeps expecting immediate attention while we're attending to everyone else." "A glass of water is hardly an unreasonable request," Elena said quietly. "Your tone was condescending." Jessica countered. "Enough," Bradley interjected, aware that other passengers were watching the exchange with interest. "Ms. Winters, please return to the galley. I'll handle this." Once Jessica had stepped away, Bradley turned to Elena. "I apologize for the delay. I'll bring your water right away." "Thank you," Elena replied. Then, her voice low enough that only he could hear, she added, "But we both know what's happening here, don't we?" Bradley stiffened. "I'm not sure what—" "You mean, your flight attendants have treated me differently from the moment I stepped on this plane," Elena said evenly. "Delayed service, minimal interaction, skepticism about my belonging in this cabin. I've been flying first class for years, Mr. Wilson. I know the difference between busy staff and prejudiced treatment." Bradley felt heat rise to his face. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Fuentes. Our crew is trained to provide equal service to all passengers." "Training doesn't always translate to practice," Elena replied, "especially when bias is unconscious." Bradley's jaw tightened. "I'll get your water," he said curtly, turning away before she could respond. In the galley, he found Jessica angrily, arranging meal trays. "That woman is impossible," she hissed when she saw him, "acting like she owns the plane." "She's a paying first-class passenger, Jessica," Bradley reminded her, reaching for a glass. "Like everyone else in the cabin," Jessica snorted. "Please, you know as well as I do she probably used miles or got some corporate upgrade. She doesn't belong up here." Bradley paused, water pitcher in hand. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "You know what I mean," Jessica said, lowering her voice. "The way she talks, how she keeps making demands. These types always act entitled when they get a taste of first class." "These types?" Bradley repeated, something uncomfortable settling in his stomach. Jessica didn't respond, but her meaning was clear. Bradley filled the water glass, a strange tension building in his chest. He had never considered himself prejudiced. He treated everyone professionally, didn't he? And yet he had made assumptions about Elena from the moment he saw her. Assumptions that had colored his actions and enabled his crew's behavior. As he returned to the cabin, water in hand, Bradley noticed something he had missed before. On the cover of Elena's leather portfolio, partially visible beneath her tablet, was an embossed logo, the distinctive insignia of Helios Aerospace, one of the world's leading aviation technology companies. He set the water down carefully. "Here. You are Dr. Fuentes. Again, I apologize for the wait. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip before returning to her work. Bradley hesitated, his curiosity overcoming his discomfort. "If you don't mind my asking, what kind of presentation are you working on?" Eleanor looked up, studying him for a moment before answering. "It's a proposal for next-generation turbine design. My team at Helios is presenting to your airline's executive board tomorrow morning." Bradley felt as if the cabin pressure had suddenly dropped. Helios Aerospace was developing technology that could potentially save Transglobal millions in fuel costs. Their CEO had been courting the company for months, and according to industry rumors, they were close to signing an exclusive deal with one major airline. "You work for Helios?" he managed, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'm their chief engineering officer," Eleanor replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "I oversee all propulsion systems development." The revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow. Not only was Elena Fuentes a first-class passenger with every right to be there, but she was also a C-suite executive at a company Transglobal desperately wanted to partner with. And he and his crew had spent the past 2 hours subtly communicating that she didn't belong. "I see," he said inadequately. "That sounds like important work." Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she understood exactly what was going through his mind. "It is, especially considering your airline's interest in our technology." She gestured to her work. "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish these calculations before we land." "Of course," Bradley said, retreating to the galley where he found Jessica and Amber in quiet conversation. "Ladies," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "the passenger in 3C is Dr. Elena Fuentes, Chief Engineering Officer at Helios Aerospace, the company that's about to decide whether to partner with us or with United on their new fuel-efficient engine technology. A contract worth billions to our airline." The color drained from Jessica's face. "The Helios contract? But I thought you—" "Thought what?" Bradley interrupted. "That executives at major aerospace companies only look a certain way. That first class is reserved for people who fit your image of success." Amber looked down, shame evident in her posture. Jessica, however, became defensive. "How are we supposed to know who she was? She didn't say anything about being a VIP." "She shouldn't have to," Bradley said, the reality of the situation becoming clearer to him by the second. "She's a paying first-class passenger. That should be enough for us to treat her with respect and proper service." For the remainder of the flight, Bradley watched as his crew made awkward attempts to correct their earlier behavior, offering Elena extra attention, frequent drink refills, enthusiastic smiles that bordered on desperate. Elena accepted their service with polite grace, neither acknowledging the change nor calling out the previous slights. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Bradley made a decision. He approached Elena's seat, waiting until she looked up from her work. "Dr. Fuentes, I want to personally apologize for the service you've received today," he said quietly. "It wasn't up to our standards, and there's no excuse for it." Elena closed, her tablet giving him her full attention. "Which standards are those, Mr. Wilson? The ones reserved for passengers who look like they belong in first class, or the ones for everyone else?" Her directness was disconcerting but fair. "You deserved better," he admitted, "regardless of your position at Helios or any other factor." Elena studied him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you know why I never mentioned my role at Helios when I boarded?" she asked. Bradley shook his head. "Because I shouldn't have to," she said simply. "No passenger should need impressive credentials to receive basic respect. The woman in economy who cleans hotel rooms for a living deserves the same dignity as the CEO in 1A. Her words struck with precision, targeting the uncomfortable truth Bradley had been avoiding. He had created a culture where passengers were valued differently, based on appearance, accent, and perceived status. "You're right," he acknowledged, "and I'm sorry." The pilot announced their final approach, prompting Elena to secure her belongings. As she did, Bradley noticed a small pin on her lapel that he had somehow missed before, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest civilian honors in the country. "Is that—" he began, gesturing toward the pin. Elena glanced down. "Yes, for our team's work developing emergency respiratory systems during the pandemic. We repurposed aircraft ventilation technology to create low-cost ventilators. Innovations that had saved thousands of lives." Bradley recalled from news reports. Standing before him was not just a C-suite executive, but a literal lifesaver, someone whose work had changed the world for the better. And he and his crew had treated her as if she didn't deserve a glass of water. As the plane touched down and passengers prepared to disembark, Bradley made one final approach to Elena. "Dr. Fuentes, I know this doesn't make up for your experience today, but I'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade on your return flight." Elena zipped her carry-on bag closed before responding. "That's not necessary, Mr. Wilson. I don't want special treatment. I want equal treatment, for myself and for everyone who boards your planes." Bradley swallowed hard. "Of course, but may I ask, will this incident affect your recommendation regarding the Helios contract?" It was the question that had been plaguing him since discovering her identity. A partnership with Helios would mean billions for Transglobal. Hundreds of jobs, market advantage, cutting-edge technology. Elena shouldered her bag, regarding him steadily. "My engineering assessments are based on technical merit and business alignment, not personal experiences." She paused. "But company culture matters in long-term partnerships. How an organization treats people when they think no one important is watching. That reveals their true values." With that observation hanging in the air between them, she moved toward the exit. Before stepping through the door, she turned back. "Your airline has excellent technical infrastructure, Mr. Wilson, but technology isn't the only thing that needs upgrading." After the passengers had departed, Bradley gathered his flight crew in the empty first-class cabin. Their expressions ranged from defensive to embarrassed as he recounted the significance of what had transpired. "We failed today," he told them, bluntly. "Not just as representatives of this airline, but as human beings." "She could have told us who she was," Jessica muttered, though her usual confidence was notably diminished. "That's exactly the problem," Bradley replied. "We shouldn't need to know someone's credentials to treat them with dignity. We categorized Dr. Fuentes the moment we saw her, and we were wrong. Dangerously, embarrassingly wrong." "So, what happens now?" Amber asked quietly. "Are we going to be disciplined?" Bradley considered the question. The easy response would be punitive action, a formal reprimand, perhaps even suspension. But that wouldn't address the deeper issue. "What happens now is we change," he said finally. "Starting with me. I set the tone that made you believe this. Kind of treatment was acceptable. That stops today." 3 months later, Elena Fuentes boarded another Transglobal flight, this time from San Francisco back to Atlanta. The Helios contract had been announced the previous week, a 5-year exclusive partnership for implementing their revolutionary engine design across Transglobal's entire fleet. As Elena settled into her first-class seat, a flight attendant approached. Not Jessica or Amber, but someone she hadn't met before. "Dr. Fuentes, welcome aboard," the attendant said warmly. "My name is Miguel. Would you prefer still or sparkling water before takeoff?" "Still, please," Elena replied, noticing something different about the interaction, a genuine warmth that had nothing to do with her title or position. As Miguel moved away to prepare her drink, Elena observed the first-class cabin filling with a diverse array of passengers. The crew moved among them with consistent attentiveness, their service marked by a respect that appeared universal rather than selective. "Dr. Fuentes?" Elena looked up to find Bradley Wilson standing beside her seat, his expression more relaxed than she remembered from their previous encounter. "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged, "I didn't expect to see you on this flight." "I've been overseeing some changes in our service approach," he explained. "May I?" He gestured to the empty seat beside her. Elena nodded, curious despite herself. "After our last interaction," Bradley began carefully, "I did some serious reflection on how we operate, not just the visible service elements, but the underlying attitudes that inform them." "And?" Elena prompted when he paused. "And we've implemented a complete overhaul of our training programs," he said. "Every crew member now goes through extensive unconscious bias training. We've revised our service protocols to ensure consistency across all passengers. And we've adjusted our hiring practices to build teams that better reflect the diversity of our passengers." Elena studied him, looking for signs of corporate performance rather than genuine change. "That sounds promising," she said cautiously. But training programs and protocols only work if they're reinforced by leadership. Bradley nodded. Absolutely. That's why I've been personally working flights again, something I haven't done in years. I need to model the standard, not just mandate it. Miguel returned with Elena's water, serving it with a small dish of mixed nuts. Can I bring you anything else, Dr. Fuentes? This is perfect, thank you, Elena replied. After Miguel moved on to the next passenger, Bradley continued, We've also implemented anonymous passenger feedback that specifically tracks consistency of service across all demographics. The data is reviewed weekly, and crews are coached based on the results. Elena sipped her water, considering his words. That's more comprehensive than I expected, honestly. It should have happened long ago, Bradley admitted. Sometimes we need a wake-up call to see what's been in front of us all along. He paused. Your words that day, about treating people with dignity regardless of their status, they've become something of a mantra in our training sessions. Eleanor felt a surprising wave of emotion at this revelation. She had spoken her truth that day, without much hope that it would create lasting change. To hear that her words had rippled outward, potentially improving experiences for countless passengers, was deeply meaningful. I appreciate you telling me this, she said sincerely. Bradley stood as the boarding announcement indicated they would be departing soon. I should let you get settled, but I wanted you to know that your experience that day, while regrettable, has become a catalyst for real change at Transglobal. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. Mr. Wilson? He looked back. Those changes you mentioned, extending consistent respect to all passengers regardless of appearance or status, are they happening across all cabins or just in first class? A smile touched Bradley's face. Not the practiced customer service smile she remembered, but something more genuine. Excellent question, Dr. Fuentes, and exactly the right one to ask. The answer is all cabins. We're tracking service metrics, in economy just as rigorously as in premium classes. Elena nodded, satisfied. Then I think we'll have a successful partnership. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Elena watched the flight crew moving efficiently through their pre-flight duties. Miguel offered the same attentive service to the elderly Asian man across the aisle as he did to the white executive in the front row. The difference was subtle but unmistakable, a baseline of respect that didn't fluctuate based on who was receiving it. Real change often begins with uncomfortable moments, when assumptions are challenged, biases exposed, and the gap between who we claim to be and how we actually behave becomes impossible to ignore. For Bradley Wilson and Transglobal Airlines, that moment had come in the form of a brilliant engineer who refused to accept being treated as less than she deserved. And for Elena Fuentes, the evidence of that change surrounded her now, not in grand gestures or special treatment, but in the simple dignity of being seen as inherently worthy of respect, no credentials required. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't a dramatic confrontation or public shaming, but rather the quiet insistence on being treated with the dignity every human deserves. And sometimes that quiet insistence can create ripples that grow into waves of meaningful change. What about you? Have you ever been judged based on appearance rather than ability? Or have you caught yourself making assumptions about others that proved wildly inaccurate? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos that challenge perspectives and celebrate the power of dignity in the face of discrimination.